I'm in the middle of chapter 25 in the first book of Samuel. And what happened, just to recap, is we got introduced to a very wealthy couple called Nabal and Abigail. And they live around the town of Carmel, which is in the Judean territory, the southern Judean territory. So at this point, David was roaming the land, the wilderness of Paran, with his 600 men. And they came across the shepherds of this couple. The man Nabal is described as churlish and of evil doing. So he was essentially very rude and confrontational. And she was described as of a good understanding and a beautiful countenance. So she had a pretty face and she was very smart. That's what that means in other words, right? And what happened was David very politely asked his servants for food, and Nabal refused him very rudely. So David just told his men, let's just get your swords and we're going to go slaughter these people, right? Essentially, and what he specifically said, I'm just going to read these last couple of verses here. Now David had said, surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath requited me evil for good. So, and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain to him by the morning light any that pisseth against the wall. Okay, so pisseth against the wall just literally means that. The King James Version, which I'm reading out of, is extremely accurate. Most modern translations will translate this into male, right, or men. So by the morning light, because this is somewhat in the evening when they decide to go, when David just simply loses it, right, and he decides that he's going to go kill all the men into this property, and then he takes 400 men and leaves 200 behind. So you may be tempted to think that this is an overwhelming or disproportionate force, but that's not necessarily the case. So for example, about 1,000 years prior to David, when Abraham lived, he had a proportionate number of cattle and he had a massive property as well. And then he got 318 men that just literally grew up on his property to chase the 4 kings that kidnapped his nephew Lot. So it is to be expected that a property of that has a large number of essentially trained men, soldiers in other words, because back then they didn't have the protection that we have in a government, if you live in a civilized world, that is. So it was more like kind of feudal rulers, property owners that owned a whole lot, and then they had trained men that were ready to essentially protect the property and the owners of the property. So at this point in the story I also told you that Abigail had not heard any of that. One of her servants warned her that her husband had responded very rudely. So she prepares a whole lot of food for these 400, supposedly 400 men. She probably didn't know exactly how many, but they told her how many men are out there. So she prepares a whole lot of food. And as I mentioned, a disproportionate number of bottles of wine, 2 bottles of wine for them. And then what happens next is she is riding on a donkey to meet David, along with all of the food that she's bringing to feed those men and to essentially apologize. So the next part of the story is where David and Abigail meet. And I'm going to read that, but I just want to warn you a couple of things. So her syntax is, first of all, it's extraordinary. She's apparently a very well-educated woman of good understanding, as it said earlier. And her syntax is truly formulated in such a way that what she says just simply comes out without much stopping, so that whoever is listening does not get a chance to really think, but just gets all that she is saying. And it is a very brilliant way of formulating syntax. So a couple of things that stand out in English is that we use the word Lord, and the Lord. So she uses my Lord. So if you hear that, she's referring to David. She calls him my Lord. Okay? But when you hear the Lord, she's talking about the Lord God, right? So that's one of the things that you should pay attention to. The other thing is that she refers to herself as thine handmaid, right? Your handmaid. And this is what happens. So this is in chapter 25, verses 23 through 31. And I may stop here and there, even though this is not really meant to be stopped at all. But I will stop here and there just because it is important for you to follow to understand what exactly she's doing and why it is so brilliant, right? And here's how that goes. And when Abigail saw David, she hasted and lighted off the ass and fell before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground and fell at his feet and said, Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience and hear the words of thine handmaid. Let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as is his name, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. And again, I'll stop here because, so Nabal is a play of words. It means folly. So she's saying, it's my mistake, right? Upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, I beg you, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. Let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as is his name, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord, whom thou didst send. Right? She's just literally explaining, I didn't see these men that you sent. Only my husband Nabal saw them, and he is foolish. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies, and they that seek evil to my Lord, be as Nabal, and now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my Lord. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, and evil had not been found in thee all thy days. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee. She's talking about King Saul, right? Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul, but the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the souls of thine enemies. Them shall he sling out as out of the middle of a sling, and it shall come to pass when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. Yeah, this is incredible. It's such a stark contrast with the way that David speaks. Obviously, she's showing a whole lot of obeisance. She calls him my Lord. And then she just essentially recounts his entire story. So let's not forget that David at this point is extremely famous. And, you know, she just piles it on so thick. I mean, just, I don't know if you caught that. And the souls of thine enemies, them shall he sling out. So God will sling out. And of course, he defeated Goliath with a sling. God will sling out the souls of your enemies as out of the middle of a sling. And it shall come to pass when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee. So apparently she knows, just like the rest of society out there, they knew exactly that David was given specific promises. So those promises apparently were given David very early on. So here David is probably in his early to mid-20s. She's potentially just a little bit younger than him. So they're very close to age. She's at this point childless from what we know, married to this guy, living on this massive property. And then she's saying, this shall be no grief unto thee. So she's thanking God. May God be blessed. May the Lord be blessed that he has kept you from committing this, what is essentially amounting to avenging yourself, right? And then when you become ruler of Israel, this will be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood costlessly, right? So first of all, what does she do as soon as she gets off that donkey? She bows herself to the ground, fell before David on her face, right? That's why it's critical that she's described earlier as having a beautiful countenance. She literally gets off the donkey and puts her pretty face in the dirt in front of him, right? And then starts talking, falls at his feet and starts talking. Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, right? This is my fault. I didn't know this. Let me talk to you. Hear my words. So she's using very typical Davidic logic here. So she just literally gets him before she even meets him physically. These people have never met before, right? They have never met before. And she's using his type of logic to get to him. She just literally gets to him, through him, and stops him from avenging himself and committing what would become evil, right? So incredible use of syntax too. Again, this is meant to be spoken just breathlessly, and that's the whole, these verses start with she hasted and lighted off the ass, right? She just hurried and then just got off and then fell on her face and then bowed in front of him and started talking. And of course, he has no chance to respond, and he's apparently very much floored, right? And we'll see that here in a little bit. And again, knowing about God's promise, and then, of course, she tells him, let these men behind you accept this blessing. Here is the food, just let them eat. Again, incredible speech here, just a few verses. And then this is what David's response to this is. And David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to me. And blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst hasted and come to meet me, surely there had not been left unto Nabal by the morning light any that pisseth against the wall. So David received of her hand that which she had brought him, and said unto her, go up in peace to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person. Right, so David's obviously here extremely polite response. That is almost something that, as I've said before, he is very blunt. He's very blunt. He's very short. Almost comes off as, I wouldn't call it rude, but just extremely blunt. You don't hear him talk like that. So you can tell right away that she just truly impressed him, and he repeats exactly everything that she said, right? Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me, and blessed be thy advice. Blessed be your advice, and blessed be you, right? Which have kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. And he's saying, for in very deed, that just literally means indeed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst hasted. So the God kept me from hurting you. And had you not hurried and come to meet me, I would have just wiped off your household, right? And every man in your household. So David receives all the food. I mean, as I said, it's a whole lot of food. How many hundreds of loaves we described up there. And those 2 bottles of wine. We're not told who drank those 2 bottles of wine. I kind of highly doubt the 400 men split those. I imagine he had a good evening out there. I'm sure she had a glass or 2 before she left. Okay. And then here's what happens next. And Abigail came to Nabal. So she returns back in peace, right? And Abigail came to Nabal. And behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing less or more until the morning light. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal that he died. So she returns back to her house. Nabal is having a massive party, right? He's drunk. He's very drunk. He was very drunken, is what this says, right? His heart was merry with him. She doesn't say anything until the morning light. And then in the morning, she just tells him what happened. And he became as a stone. His heart died within him and he became as a stone. So potentially he had a heart attack. We don't know. But 10 days later, the Lord smote Nabal that he died. So 10 days later, Nabal dies. That's quite the, not exactly a great way to sober up, it must have been a pretty rough hangover there. So, all right, what happens next? So these are verses 39 through 42 in chapter 25, first book of Samuel, once again. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord that hath pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head." And David sent and communed with Abigail to take her to him to wife. And when the servants of David were come to Abigail to Carmel, they spake unto her, saying, "David sent us unto thee to take thee to him to wife." And she arose and bowed herself on her face to the earth and said, "Behold, let thine handmaid be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hasted and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels of hers that went after her, and she went after the messengers of David and became his wife. So David eventually hears that Nabal was dead, right? He thanks God that he pleads his cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. So he thanks God for keeping him from committing evil, for the Lord had returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. And then what David does is he sent and communed with Abigail to take her to him to wife. So he sends his servants essentially to that compound, to Abigail, to let her know that, "Hey, would you like to be my wife?" I mean, the guy's pretty straightforward. You got to give him that. I told you he's pretty blunt, right? And then she does what? Once again, she bowed herself on her face to the earth and said, "Behold, let thine handmaid be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." Essentially, I am totally good with that. And Abigail hasted, so she heard and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels of hers that went after her. So she gets 5 of her girl servants, essentially, and then she went after the messengers of David and became his wife. All right. So God here very conveniently intervenes so that David does not commit evil and avenge himself personally for what Nabal had done, right? I don't know if you remember, I told you earlier in the chapter last time that literally the first line of the chapter was that Samuel died, and it was just one-liner. Samuel was incredible influence. He was incredible influence on both King Saul, and we'll see that in a little bit, because King Saul literally tries to invoke Samuel from the dead so that he can get advice from him. So he was an incredible influence on both King Saul and David. And at this point, Samuel is dead. And I don't know if we obviously know that Samuel and David were incredible companions, right? He was hiding David. Samuel was hiding David. So there's no doubt that Samuel was an incredible influence on David. He probably kept a lid on David's impulsivity. I don't think that this is a coincidence that we see what happened here right after the death of Samuel, right? And unfortunately, later on, God does not prevent David from committing pretty much the same sin, if not even greater, right? Even greater evil. So the absence of Samuel truly has an impact on David. And you can tell that here because he would have restrained himself had Samuel been around, just like he restrained himself in the previous chapter, right? Whenever King Saul was at his mercy, essentially. So, again, I don't think that's coincidental, but that's just my thought on this. So, how does this chapter end? This is where it gets extremely interesting. Of course, towards the end is where it gets extremely interesting. And these are the last two verses 43 and 44 of chapter 25. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were also both of them his wives. But Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Phalti, the son of Laish, whom was of Galim. So, after we hear all of this, right, this chapter really, literally ends with, he also took another woman to wife, and then he lost the previous one, so he is up 2, down 1, right? And that's very typical of David, right? I mean, he gains a few wives, then loses some, then gains a lot more, then loses all of them, then regains them back. I mean, it's pretty intense, right? What a beautiful, beautiful fairy tale ending. And of course, as I discussed previously, this is one of the reasons that, as I started this chapter in the previous video, I started this by saying that you don't see many adaptations of what you would think are love stories of relationships between men and women in the Bible. We don't see that at all in movies, right? And one of the reasons is because this is highly inappropriate. A whole lot of them are extremely inappropriate, right? But there's also another reason that is much more mundane. It's very prosaic and it's very obvious if you even think about that. And that is that modern filmmaking, especially streaming, the viewership is dominated. It is absolutely dominated by those who we refer to as female, okay? So that is a statistic that is widely available. You can look that up if you do not believe me. There is no conspiracy theories here. Female viewership dominates streaming. They dominate movies, they dominate romance, they dominate drama viewing, they dominate, let's just put it this way, outside of politics and outside of sports, there is absolute dominance of female viewership, okay? And the problem is that no one is that dumb in Hollywood to create a story that represents the truth here, right? Think about it this way. Imagine an extremely intelligent, by all means, this woman was extraordinarily intelligent, right? And she's not just intelligent, she's also beautiful. And she puts her pretty face in the dirt before a man, bows herself down, right? And then she literally begs him. And then the next thing you know, he just goes on and gets another wife. And then he gets another 25 wives. I mean, how many women would want to see this happen? So she's got to share her husband, who apparently was extremely well looking, right? And obviously very smart and obviously very powerful. She's got to share him with 25 other women. That's a total negatory, right? That's a negative. So this is obviously a very mundane reason why you don't hear this. And any kind of adaptation of these stories between men and women in the Bible, they're going to be heavily redacted. They're going to have to heavily spin the story in a way that is actually palatable to the people who pay the bills, right? I mean, Hollywood directors, as much as they lack creativity, they're not stupid business people, right? They have an extraordinary sense of business. You know, they have huge business acumen, essentially, is what's going on here. So that is the reason why you will never see this. And by the way, this is one of the best of them, right? Then later on, you get into when David meets Bathsheba, right? And that's in the next book of Samuel. And that story is completely unpalatable to modern viewers, right? I mean, no current adaptation of David will ever show you what truly happened there, right? Because we're talking about a man who is clearly in his 50s. She's clearly a very, very young woman, right? She's a beautiful young woman. He's an established king, very powerful king. He completely objectifies her, and ultimately, it ends with murder of the husband of that woman, who apparently was a super nice guy, because unlike Nabal, nothing bad is said about Uriah the Hittite, the husband of Bathsheba. Nothing bad is said, and he's mentioned multiple times, a lot more than Nabal further down the road, right? And he's one of his subordinates. That would be totally unacceptable to modern viewers of these types of stories. So again, just if you recall, the old saying, follow the money and you'll find out. This is just literally the case right here. There are a few other things worth mentioning here. A lot of people with, let's just call them atheistic tendencies, they claim that this book is a fairy tale, right? Fairy tale? Really? You read this kind of fairy tales to your children? And again, David and Bathsheba and David and Abigail is some of the best, right? Some of the most restrained. Let's just go back to what? Abrahamic times, right? Lot escapes Sodom and Gomorrah after God blitzes those two towns, right? And the towns surrounding them. He escapes that with his two daughters, and then they hide in a cave. That is Lot and his two daughters, just the three of them, right? And they decide to get him drunk and sleep with him 2 nights in a row. And then they get pregnant. How do you spin that one in a movie today, right? I mean, talk about lack of consent here, right? So you cannot necessarily flip this and make it a story that fits modern filmmaking and the compass that we currently have, right? It just simply doesn't happen. What are you going to do, right? I mean, hey, Dad, guess what? We're pregnant. The three of us. And we're going to throw you a little gender reveal party. I mean, is that how you're going to spin this? It's pretty incredible. And by the way, they had boys. Each of the daughters had boys. In fact, one of them, there's a modern capital in the Middle East named after him, right, of a pretty famous country. And then the other one, there's a desert named after him. And then there's also a town in Utah named after him. So imagine that, right? Oh, man. Anyway, so how does the story about David and Abigail end, right? What happens afterwards? So we're not told much about them until much later. And what happens is that apparently they have a child, okay? So I guess someone got a happy ending out of that. They had a child, and that child was, by all means, it appears to be one of the most normal children that David had. His name is Daniel. We don't hear much about him. He probably lived a very quiet court life. All of David's children were just helping him run the kingdom, essentially. So unlike Ahinoam, the one that I just mentioned, her son, his name is Amnon, he was completely deranged, right? I mean, he was not just that, he was also a rapist. And then we're talking about his other children from other wives. For example, Absalom, right? He was another complete loser. And then Adonijah that tried to usurp the kingdom. So Abigail's child, by all means, appears to be a very normal child. And then also very much the children of Bathsheba, right? Those are Solomon and Nathan. Jesus Christ traces his genealogy through both of Bathsheba's children, right? Solomon in the book of Matthew, and that is the genealogy apparently on his father's side, Jesus Christ's side, Joseph's side, through the kings. And then in the Gospel of Luke, we have Jesus Christ's genealogy going through Nathan, the other child of Bathsheba. Those two, Nathan and Solomon, also turned out to be great children, right? Of course, Solomon, we know, is not without fault, but neither is anybody else in this book, right? So anyway, may you guys be blessed. And next time I'm going to talk about the final pursuit, the final pursuit of King Saul when he pursues David. So I will see you next time.